On a Monday morning in early 2023, every employee at IgniteTech sat down to work and was told they had one job: use AI. No customer calls, no budget spreadsheets, no legacy product maintenance, just AI. It was called AI Monday, and it happened every single week. 20% of the company's entire payroll was committed to making it work. It didn't work. Within months, CEO Eric Vaughan had a word for what his staff were doing: sabotage. Employees were skipping training sessions, delivering deliberately poor AI outputs to demonstrate the tools didn't function, using non-approved AI tools and running their own shadow programs. The people who resisted hardest, Vaughan discovered, were not the salespeople or the marketers. They were the engineers, the ones who had actually built the product. Within a year, 80% of IgniteTech's workforce was gone. By the end of 2024, the company posted near 75% operating earnings, a profit margin that most enterprise software companies never reach in their best year across their entire history. The story went global: Fortune, Tech Republic, The Wall Street Journal. What the story didn't ask: who replaced them, for how much, and what left the building when the engineers did. To understand what Eric Vaughan decided, you first need to understand what IgniteTech actually is. Because it is not a typical software company, and the pressure he was operating under was not what it appeared to be in the headlines. IgniteTech is an acquisition machine. It buys enterprise software companies that are failing, products that large corporate customers still depend on, built by companies that have run out of money, momentum, or both. It acquires them, stabilizes them, and offers them through something called the unlimited subscription: one annual fee, access to 60+ software products. Think of it as Netflix for the enterprise, except instead of films, the library is the kind of software that manages your company's customer data, analytics platform, and supply chain. The enterprises buying this subscription are running software that is often decades old. And the knowledge of how that software actually works, its quirks, its undocumented workarounds, the things no manual covers, resides in the people who built and maintained it. IgniteTech is owned by ESW Capital, a private equity firm run by Texas billionaire Joe Lyman. ESW keeps a low public profile. They have been acquiring distressed software companies and running them at extreme margins since 2006. And they deserve credit for one thing most people overlook: dozens of software products that would otherwise have gone dark are still alive because of them. Their model requires lean staffing, high-margin operations, and a global recruitment infrastructure called crossover.work, which places contractors across the ESW portfolio at standardized rates from anywhere in the world. This is the environment into which Eric Vaughan walked in October 2020. He brought 30 years of enterprise software experience, 3 companies founded and sold, and a role as Chief Integration Officer at Unicom Global, where he managed 23 separate acquisitions. He had seen from the inside which software companies adapted to technology transitions and which ones didn't. When GPT-4 arrived in early 2023 and generative AI became a genuine capability, Vaughan looked at his 60+ legacy products maintained by human teams using decade-old workflows and saw what he described as an existential threat. AI-native competitors were beginning to build and ship faster and cheaper than legacy teams operating the old way ever could. The decision that followed felt, from where he was standing, like the only rational move. The letters were still landing in inboxes, calling it a learning initiative. Every Monday was still being framed as an investment in the team's future. But the clock on that framing was running, and Vaughan's staff were not moving fast enough to stay ahead of it. AI Mondays operated company-wide, not just technology, sales, marketing, finance, customer support. On Mondays, there were no customer calls, no budget work, no legacy product maintenance. The only permitted activity was learning the tools, building workflows, exploring what generative AI could do for each specific function. 20% of IgniteTech's entire payroll was redirected to back the program. That is not a pilot. That is the kind of investment that signals a company has already decided on an outcome and is allocating resources to reach it. The logic held. Enterprise software companies already using AI in their development cycles were shipping product updates in days rather than months. Vaughan's legacy teams were still working the way software companies had worked in 2015. Every week of delay was a week that faster, cheaper, AI-equipped competitors were closing the gap. He had watched 23 acquisitions up close. He knew which companies made it through technology transitions and which ones arrived too late. The pattern Vaughan implemented has a name: a forced AI mandate. The logic runs as follows. If you give people dedicated time, financial commitment, and a structural forcing mechanism, and they still refuse, the constraint is the people, not the process. Replace the people. Remove the constraint. On paper, it was the only move that preserved the business. But there was something Vaughan didn't calculate. Before we continue, if you're trying to start something or grow what you've already got, don't build everything from zero. That's where the months disappear. The best businesses start with a model. That's why I created the Savvy Business Profits Lab. Inside my free school, start with the free training, the 90% done-for-you business model. Click the link in the description, join free, and watch it first. Now back to the story. Because what happened next is the part every business owner needs to understand. The calls were still coming in from customers. The legacy products were still running on the servers. And inside IgniteTech, something was becoming clearer with each passing AI Monday. The people who resisted the mandate most stubbornly were the engineers. Not the sales team, not marketing, the engineers, the people who had built the specific products IgniteTech sold and maintained. Vaughan said himself that this surprised him. It deserved more than surprise. It deserved investigation. The AI tools available in early 2023 were capable of writing general-purpose code, summarizing documents, and drafting standard communications. They were considerably less capable of doing what IgniteTech's engineering teams actually did, maintaining legacy enterprise software on decade-old architecture with undocumented workarounds, custom client integrations, and institutional knowledge that accumulates over years of supporting complex systems for demanding corporate customers. An engineer who had spent 8 years on a specific analytics product knew things about it that no AI model in 2023 could have been trained on, because those things had never been written down. They existed in that engineer's head and nowhere else. When those engineers refused to hand their judgment to an AI tool, they may have been protecting their roles. They may also have been doing what engineers do when a tool is genuinely wrong for a specific task, refusing to use it and saying so loudly. A 90-day pilot on 3 to 5 specific IgniteTech workflows, measuring actual AI output quality against human output for those exact tasks, would have answered the question. Either the AI tools were adequate and the resistance was ideological, or the AI tools were inadequate and the resistance was expert judgment. Vaughan would have known which one he was firing. The diagnostic was available, and it takes no longer than a standard product sprint. He didn't run the pilot, he ran the terminations. The first termination wave landed in mid-2023. Within weeks, the numbers that followed would become the most cited data points in the story. What happened in parallel with those numbers was quieter. The morning after the first wave, IgniteTech's servers were still running. All 60-plus software products were still live. Customer logins still worked. But the engineers who had maintained specific subsystems, who knew why a particular integration broke on month-end billing runs, who held the personal contact at a client account that required a call before any system update touched their instance, who carried years of product history in their working memory precisely because it had never needed to be documented. Those engineers were gone. Their accounts deactivated. Their knowledge, unrecorded because they had always been available to supply it, was now simply absent. Not in the AI tools, not in any handover document. Gone. Within weeks, replacement hiring had begun. Through Crossover.work, ESW Capital's own global recruitment platform, AI innovation specialist roles for IgniteTech began appearing, open to any country, $60,000 a year. By end of 2024, the headline results were in. Near 75% operating earnings on 9-figure revenue. Products shipping in 4 days, Vaughan called it unthinkable in the old regime. 2 patent-pending AI products launched and in market. And a major acquisition, Khoros, a customer engagement platform serving a third of the Fortune 100. 75% operating earnings in context. The SaaS industry average sits between 15 and 25%. A company at IgniteTech's revenue running that margin is generating somewhere north of $75 million in annual profit. That is not an abstraction for any business owner. It is 5 times what most of your direct competitors keep after costs in a year. It is also, for anyone familiar with ESW Capital's track record, not a surprising number. ESW's other portfolio companies, restructured through the same Crossover.work global model across 3 decades, have historically produced margins in precisely this range. Post-acquisition, customers on the Khoros community forum began noting that new IgniteTech customer success managers admittedly know nothing about the products. The institutional knowledge the pre-layoff teams had carried was not rebuilt. It was replaced by people willing to learn AI tools anywhere in the world for $60,000 a year, starting from zero on products with decades of accumulated complexity. The 75% operating earnings was real. Whether it came from AI transformation, from the structural cost reduction of global staffing, or from both operating at once, that was a question the press coverage did not stop to ask. Before the terminations began, Vaughan had a diagnostic fork he didn't take. A structured 90-day pilot, real IgniteTech workflows, real AI tools, real output measured against real human output would have produced a finding in one of two directions. If the AI tools were adequate, Vaughan would have had evidence. He might still have fired the engineers who refused after seeing proof, but he would have known whether he was firing people who couldn't adapt or people who simply wouldn't. The distinction matters for a company that depends on institutional knowledge those people had spent years building. If the AI tools were substandard for IgniteTech's specific legacy systems, the resistance would have been recategorized, not sabotage. Early warning. The company might have spent 2023 improving its tooling. The mandate might have started later, with AI capable of actually doing the work. The terminations might have been smaller or narrower or never. What the pilot could not have resolved, whether 75% operating earnings was reachable at all without the global labor cost structure that arrived with crossover dot work. If ESW Capital's model had always required that cost structure, and AI was simultaneously the productivity mechanism and the narrative for reaching it, no diagnostic would have changed the destination. It might have changed who understood what journey they were actually on. Eric Vaughan says he would do it all again. The margin says he may be right. What the margin doesn't say, what IgniteTech's products look like to the customers who were there before the engineers left. If your team is resisting an AI mandate, how would you know whether the resistance is ideological or whether your most experienced staff are telling you the tool is wrong for the actual work? If you replaced your most resistant employees tomorrow, what specifically would leave the building that has never been written down anywhere? And if someone showed you a 75% profit margin 2 years after a painful restructure, how would you know whether the profit came from the decision you think you made or from a different decision that was already in motion underneath it? Don't click away yet. See that video on my left? Click it right now. The next story shows what happens when a business fixes the right constraint first, or the wrong one. You need to see this. Click that video and keep watching.